The land around Dustvale Gulch stretched like the spine of some ancient, dying beast. Parched hills hunched against the wind, and the earth bore the cracks of a long war with the sun. Cactus ribs rose like broken teeth from the sand. The storm that had come 2 nights prior had left its mark, not with mercy, but with a grim promise. Its rain had fallen hard, sudden, and then fled as quick as it came. Now the earth still wore its scars, wet fissures where hoof prints filled with rusty water, wagon ruts smoothed over with mud that dried into veins of clay. Overhead, the sky burned the color of split blood, and buzzards circled slow and lazy, as if knowing what came next. Near the fence line of a half-dead ranch, by a broken cattle trough that hadn't seen a proper fill in months, a girl crawled on her hands and knees. She was no older than 16, though the dirt smeared across her face and the hollows beneath her eyes made her seem more ghost than girl. Her hair hung in snarled ropes, more dust than color, and her dress, if it could still be called that, hung in jagged tatters down her back. Her knees were scraped raw, her feet bare and bleeding, and her tongue stretched out like a dog's as she lapped at the puddled water and hoof prints. She drank mud and didn't care. Hunger had long since turned to pain, then to numbness. She had flinched at every sound for so many nights that the act had become muscle memory. Every snapping twig was a whip. Every voice was a curse. Something terrible had broken her. That much was plain. But what it was, where she had come from, or who she had once been, those pieces lay buried deep behind those wild, hollow eyes. From the porch of the nearby ranch house, a man sat and watched. He had the look of someone who once mattered, but now existed more as shadow than flesh. White hair curled beneath the brim of a wide, sweat-stained hat. His beard was grizzled and thin at the chin, thick at the jaw, like it had grown out angry. A long rifle rested across his knees, and his eyes, pale as river ice, narrowed at the girl below. Emmett Rourke hadn't spoken to another soul in close to 6 months. He had no interest in doing so now. He lived quiet, worked slow, and carried the weight of 10 years of guilt like a coffin strapped to his back. Once, folks whispered his name across saloons and sheriff's offices. Bounty hunter, fast shot, lawman's ghost. But all that had ended the day, fire took his wife and son. Now he farmed dust and drank in silence, letting the world forget him 1 week at a time. Still, something about that girl made him rise. He moved quiet, like someone used to being unseen. His boots made barely a whisper as they crunched over gravel. She didn't see him coming until he was near enough to touch. She froze, her shoulders curling in on themselves like a kicked animal expecting another boot. Her fingers gripped the edge of the trough, as though it might shield her. Emmett didn't speak right away. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a strip of dry jerky, old but good. In his other hand, a folded wool blanket hung from his fingers. He crouched low, one knee clicking from old wounds, and placed both down in front of her like an offering. "No more hunger, girl," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Come inside." She stared at him, unmoving. Her eyes flicked to the food, then to his face, searching for the trap. She didn't find one, but trust doesn't come easy to the broken. Then, all at once, her legs gave out. She crumpled like a doll in a strong wind, the last shreds of strength spent in the reach for water and safety. Her body hit the ground with a thud, and the world went still. Emmett exhaled through his nose and muttered something only the wind heard. He lifted her gently, surprised by how light she was. Bones and skin. Maybe less than that. She didn't stir in his arms. He carried her across the porch and through the warped front door, into the warmth of a home that hadn't known company in a decade. The lantern was already lit inside, casting flickers on the faded wallpaper and the dusty rifle rack. He laid her down on the old settee beneath the window, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and sat beside her, eyes on the dark horizon beyond the pane. Outside, the buzzards kept circling, but they were early. In those lands, men died for less. But kindness, that day, lit the spark that'd bring hellfire down on Dustvale. The girl didn't speak for 3 days. Not a word, not even a whisper. Emmett kept his distance mostly, left bowls of broth on the table, cool cloths by her bedside, a fire crackling low to beat the cold that crept in after sunset. He watched from across the room, sharpening tools or mending his bootlaces in silence, letting her find herself again in her own time. On the fourth morning, she tried to stand and nearly fell flat on the floor. Emmett caught her under the arms, eased her back to the edge of the bed, and grunted, "You'll need stew before you try to walk. You're not half a ghost anymore, but you ain't whole yet." That afternoon, she asked for his name. He gave it, Emmett Rourke, and she repeated it quietly, like tasting the sound in her mouth. "My name's Lena," she said after a long pause. "Lena May." The next day, the dam broke. It started with small things, questions about where she was, how long she'd slept. But soon enough, her voice dropped and her eyes fixed on a far-off place as she spoke. She told him what happened. Her family had been headed west, like so many others. Her father was a carpenter, good with horses, and had planned to build homes for the settlers in Wyoming Territory. They had no enemies, no debts, just a dream bigger than the rickety wagon that carried it. It ended just past the Salt River Bend. She woke to gunfire and the smell of smoke. Men screaming, her mother's voice crying out, then silenced. Horses reared. Her father pulled down from the front bench and shot through the chest. Her sister, Caroline, had been dragged away, fighting with fists too small to matter. The gang called themselves the Dead Spur Riders, wearing black gloves and red scarves, boots scuffed raw at the heels. One of them had teeth like yellow corn and laughed every time someone screamed. They rode off with Lena and her sister in tow. "They kept us in a boxcar," Lena whispered, eyes damp but no tears falling. "Took what they wanted when they wanted. Made us beg for water. Then one night, a coyote howl scared their horses, and I slipped the chain. I ran." Emmett didn't speak for a while. He sat back, his fingers pressed together like a church steeple, staring at the hearth flames. Later that evening, Lena fell asleep in the chair, her legs tucked beneath her like a curled pup. She shifted in her sleep, and her shirt collar slid just off her shoulder. That's when Emmett saw it. A burned scar, ugly and dark, like an iron had been pressed there without mercy. The shape was unmistakable, a spur, the rowel twisted like a devil's grin. Emmett's breath caught in his throat. He'd seen that mark before. Years ago, on the chest of a man named Wyatt Drover, a hired gun wanted for robbery, assault, and half a dozen murders. Emmett had tracked him into a ravine outside of Sweetwater and dropped him with a shot to the thigh. Found the brand when he pulled his shirt back. Dead Spur business. And Dead Spur riders were supposed to be long gone. That night, over a cold cup of coffee, Emmett turned things over in his mind. He thought about taking Lena to the local marshal. Dust Vale wasn't far. A ride through the Southern Trail would get her to safety. But he knew the law in Dust Vale was brittle as dried grass. And when Lena finally whispered the name, Drex Mercer, Emmett nearly dropped his cup. Mercer had led the Dead Spur Riders a decade ago, and by all accounts, had died in a mine collapse during a gold heist gone wrong. His body was never recovered. Most figured he'd burned alive or suffocated beneath the rock. But Emmett had never believed the devil took him. Next morning, Emmett hitched his mule and rode into Dust Vale. The wind smelled of old meat and gun oil. The town looked smaller than he remembered, like it was folding in on itself. He passed boarded windows and shops with half-painted signs. Kids peeked from behind curtains, their eyes too quiet. At the general store, he overheard the rumors. "They're back," the old clerk muttered, handing over a sack of flour. "Saw smoke rising out near Blood Canyon. Heard the crying at night. Sheriff ain't doing nothing. Says it's just mountain cats. But we all know." Another man added, "They ride the ridge line in 2s and 3s. Red scarves. Seen one with a gold spur and a shotgun long as my arm." Emmett asked no questions. He left with his supplies, tipping his hat low. Back at the ranch, the sun had already begun to dip. Lena was out in the yard, using a stick to draw shapes in the dirt. She looked up, eyes sharper than before. She knew something had changed. Emmett didn't say a word. He walked past her and into the house. Inside, behind the stove wall, was a trapdoor she hadn't seen. He opened it, knelt down, and lifted out an iron-bound chest. He hadn't opened it in 10 years. Inside were memories sharpened to kill. A leather gun belt, spurs worn down by desert rocks. Bounty posters, some folded, some stained. Faces crossed with black ink. And there, nestled in the velvet lining like a sleeping serpent, lay a custom silver revolver with an ivory grip carved with a rose. He loaded it slow, each bullet a promise. Then the long-barrel rifle. Checked the sights. Cleaned the chamber. Behind him, Lena stood at the threshold, quiet. "Are they coming?" she asked. Emmett didn't turn. They never stopped. He holstered the pistol and buckled the belt. His eyes met hers across the fading daylight. "They thought the fire had taken all I loved," he said softly, almost like a prayer. "But it hadn't taken my aim." They came just after sundown. The first warning was the dust, thick and low like a creeping fog, rising from the edge of the ridge line. Then came the thunder of hooves, distant at first, then louder, too many to count. Soon the shouts followed, crude and sharp, laced with cruel laughter and drunk hollering. Smoke curled upward as torches were lit, and the lead riders carried them high like they were setting the sky on fire. The Dead Spur riders had returned to Dustvale. They rode in from the north, tearing through the dead wheat and rusted fence posts of Emmett's ranch like wolves through a sheepfold. Red scarves over their faces, spurs clinking like bells of war, pistols drawn and swinging. There were maybe 9 or 10 of them, maybe more. Hard to tell through the dust and gunfire. Inside the ranch house, Emmett moved like a man whose blood had turned to cold iron. He pulled Lena close, shoved a small, pearl-handled Derringer into her hand, and pressed a pocket watch into her palm. Tarnished, cracked, but still ticking. "This was my son's," he said. "You keep it safe." He led her to the trapdoor by the hearth, threw it open, and pointed down. "Stay quiet. Don't open that door for anyone but me. If it comes to it, aim for the chest." Lena didn't argue. She climbed down, eyes wide but steady. Before he shut the door, she reached back and touched his sleeve, just once. Then the darkness swallowed her. Emmett locked the latch, covered it with a rug, and turned to war. The night roared to life. First, the front gate, rigged with tripwire, snapped taut. A rider flew backward from his saddle, tangled in barbed wire Emmett had hidden under a scatter of loose hay. His scream was short. The next man galloped straight into a trench covered in cattle bones and broken pitchforks. The others slowed, cursed, and dismounted. Emmett fired from the upper window, the long-barrel rifle kicking like a mule. One shot, clean through the neck of a rider crouching by the well. Another burst forward, ducking behind the chicken coop. Emmett waited. 2 seconds. Then a second shot punched through the thin boards and dropped him where he stood. He moved through the house like a shadow. Windows pre-marked for sightlines, extra bullets stashed in wall cracks. The flash of his muzzle lit the night in bursts. Outside, chaos reigned. Riders shouting to one another, some fleeing, some flanking, one throwing a torch toward the barn. Flames took fast. The dry hay fed it like breath. The barn lit up like a match head. That's when the nightmare arrived. Drex Mercer rode in slow, through the firelight. His face was half-scarred, twisted like melted wax, the mark of an old burn. His right eye shone pale and dead, but the left glittered with something darker than hate. He wore a black coat and no hat, his revolver polished and resting in his hand like it had grown there. He dismounted as the last of the flames reached the roof beam. The barn groaned and then collapsed in a shower of sparks. "Rourke," Mercer bellowed. "Come out, old man. Let's settle this, just us." Emmett stepped out from the shadows of the porch, rifle across his chest, smoke behind him, ash in his hair. "You ain't aged well," Emmett called. Mercer smiled, wolfish. "Still breathing. Better than I figured. You've got something belongs to me." "She ain't yours." "Don't much matter," Mercer said. "Dead or alive, I'm talking her." The firelight reflected in Mercer's twisted face as he raised his gun. He fired. Emmett dove sideways, the bullet tearing through his coat. He rolled behind the well post, fired once, missed. Mercer advanced, slow and steady, another shot clipping Emmett's shoulder. Blood bloomed down his arm. Emmett dropped the rifle, drew the silver revolver, and braced it with both hands. Mercer ducked and sprinted, suddenly younger, faster than he should have been, cornering Emmett against the shed wall. "You always were too slow when it mattered," Mercer hissed. He raised his revolver, point blank. The shot never came. Crack! A small, bright flare from behind Mercer's shoulder. He jerked mid-turn. Another shot. His revolver dropped from his hand. Blood spilled down his side. He turned, stunned, and there stood Lena, trembling just a few feet behind him. The Derringer smoked in her hand. Her face was pale, but her eyes didn't flinch. Mercer collapsed to his knees. He stared at her, gasping, his breath coming ragged. "You've got her eyes," he rasped. Then he fell, dead weight, heavy with something more than death. Emmett staggered forward and caught Lena just as she dropped the gun. She was shaking now, the adrenaline crashing out of her body all at once. She began. "I know," Emmett said. He held her until the tremors passed. Behind them, the barn continued to smolder. The remaining dead spur riders, seeing their leader fall and their plan undone, turned tail and vanished into the dark. They'd come for blood and fire and left with neither. The war was over before most townsfolk even lit their lamps. At dawn, the silence settled. One by one, the doors of Dust Vale creaked open. People stepped out into the light. For the first time in years, they looked beyond their own porches, toward the hills, toward the house, where smoke still curled upward, but no more fire burned. A little boy pointed and whispered, "Was that Emmett Rourke?" A woman nodded slowly. That was the ghost, the one they said disappeared. But ghosts don't leave footprints in the dirt, and Rourke had left a trail straight through hell. The morning after the fire, Dust Vale was quiet in a way that felt earned. Not the silence of fear, like it had been for years, but the hush of something finally finished. The smoke had thinned, the sun crept through the ash-hung sky, and Emmett Rourke stood in the blackened soil with a shovel in his hand. He said nothing as he dug. One boot pressed into the scorched earth with each push, his shoulder stiff from the bullet that had torn through him. Blood still crusted beneath the bandage, but he didn't flinch. Lena worked beside him. She didn't ask for rest, didn't look away when they laid the corpses down, especially not when they lowered Drex Mercer into the ground. She watched every inch of dirt fall on his scarred face. When Emmett offered to say something, she just shook her head. Some names are better left buried. By the time the sun reached its peak, the graves were filled. Simple markers made from fence wood leaned in the wind. The town never came to see the burial. Maybe out of shame, maybe respect, maybe both. Back at the ranch, Emmett placed a box on the porch beside Lena's seat. Inside, a new pair of boots, hand-stitched with thick soles and silver buckles. A worn but sturdy riding coat, deep green, lined for cold mornings. And one more thing, folded, yellowed, but very real. The deed to the land. Lena stared at him, blinking once, then again. "You giving me your place?" He nodded. "Ain't mine anymore. Was just holding it till someone showed up who deserved it." She tried to protest, but he raised a hand. "You've got more grit than any man I've known. And I've known some devils. This land needs someone like you now. Somebody who can remember what it took to earn peace." She swallowed hard. "Why'd you help me, Emmett? You didn't know me. Could have left me in the dirt." He looked out toward the canyon line, where the last wisps of smoke vanished in the breeze. "You reminded me who I was before I gave up," he said, "and that was worth more than what I had left." Word of what happened spread like wildfire. Only this time, the flames brought stories instead of smoke. By the end of the week, folks in Dust Vale whispered new names in the saloon, at the general store, even in church pews. They called Lena, the girl who burned the riders, and they spoke Emmett's name with a reverence that hadn't been heard in a decade. "The Gray Ghost," they said. "He's real, and he came back from the dead for her." A few weeks later, a traveling writer from New York wandered into town, said he'd heard something wild about a gang, a shootout, and a girl with a pocket pistol who outdrew the devil. People talked. Some gave half-truths, some added flair. By the time he left, the tale he wrote bore only a faint resemblance to the truth. He sold it to a dime novel press out east. It ran under the title, Flames of Dust Vale, The Girl and the Gun Ghost. Years passed. Lena aged into her boots. She ran the ranch well, more horses, better crops, a roof that didn't leak. She kept Emmett's silver revolver in a glass case above the hearth. The pocket watch still ticked on the nightstand by her bed. One evening, long after the last of the riders had faded from memory, she sat on the porch in a rocking chair, a blanket draped over her knees. The setting sun spilled orange light across the fields. A cool wind rustled the fence grass. She held the dime novel in her lap, thumbing through its dog-eared pages, smiling at the foolishness of it all. How they'd made her taller, Emmett younger, the gang twice as large. They'd left out the blood, the terror, the smell of burning pine, and old sweat. But that was all right. Truth, she figured, didn't need to be shouted. It just needed to be lived. She turned to the last page, where the writer had scribbled a line trying to sound poetic. Some ghosts ride alone into the fire, but the girl rode out. Lena looked up, toward the far fence line where the wind moved like smoke. Emmett was long gone, but his boots still sat by the door. His hat still hung on the wall, and his memory lived in the soil. They say ghosts don't bleed, but in Dust Vale, one bled enough to save a girl, and damn near saved a town with her.